Both Union and Confederate militaries structured their armies almost the same way, with some other minor differences depending on their situation. This video is mainly focused on the infantry element of the army, since cavalry and artillery were structured differently. Firstly, to understand the whole army, we need to look at the smallest element of the army, which is composed of the company. A company would be normally raised from a county or city depending on where it is forming at. The company consists of 100 men led by a captain, or can be split into 2 platoons of 50 men each, led by lieutenants, or into squads of 10 men each, led by a sergeant. The company would consist of 100 men, 3 commissioned officers, and 97 enlisted. The captain of the company would answer directly to the colonel. Each company in the regiment was designated a letter from A to K, with the exception of J, because it looks similar to an I. The first company to be formed would take A as their designation, and so on until each letter was assigned. Once a company was formed, it would join the nearest regiment. A half-sized regiment is called a battalion, meaning that it only raised at least half of the required numbers of companies to become a regiment. A battalion would be led by a lieutenant or a major, depending on what the battalion has. For the most part, battalions would be only seen on the Confederate side, and if one was on the Union side, it would be really rare. A great example of a battalion is the 1st Special Battalion Louisiana Infantry, led by Major Chatham Robideau Wheat. This battalion raised 5 companies in Louisiana before departing for Virginia, fearing that they would miss out if they tried to raise 5 more companies. Sadly, they disbanded due to extreme losses during the 7 Days Battle and would join other formed Louisiana regiments. A newly formed regiment would consist of 10 companies with a total of 1,000 men per regiment, with the exception of some regiments that would have more or less companies, like the 1st Texas, who had 12 companies formed. But by late war, most regiments would consist of an average of 300 men due to attrition from war and disease. Sometimes a regiment would split into equal-sized battalions depending on their situation. One battalion led by the colonel, and the other led by the lieutenant colonel. The regiment would be led by a colonel elected from the pool of captains in the regiment, or placed there by either state's governments. The colonel would be answered directly to the brigadier general. By the middle of the war, some regiments would be led by lieutenant colonels or even lower ranks. A regiment would be composed mostly of men from a single state. Regiments would take on the number and the order they were formed. Once a regiment is formed, it would join a brigade it was assigned to. For the most part on both sides, regiments would be assigned to brigades with other regiments from their same area, like the Stonewall Brigade, who consisted solely of Virginian troops. To get this in perspective, I will use the 1st Texas Volunteer Infantry Regiment as my example. At the beginning of the war, 1st Texas was assembled at Richmond in August of 1861 by 10 companies raised in East Texas in the counties of Polk, Cherokee, Marion, Sabine, Harrison, Tyler, Anderson, Cass, Houston, and St. Augustine. The regiment would be reinforced by 2 more companies come August of 1861 from the counties of Newton and Nacogdoches. By the September of 1862, the regiment would only have 226 effectives at the Battle of Antietam, but by July of 1863, it would have 820 effectives at the Battle of Gettysburg. A brigade would be the main fighting unit of the American Civil War and would consist of an average of 4 regiments, about 4,000 men. During the war, brigades would be reorganized to consist of different amounts of regiments due to battle losses, disease, and desertion. A brigade would be led by a brigadier general, or if he is not present, a senior colonel. Whoever it is would answer directly to the major general. Union brigades would be identified with the numbers, like the 1st Brigade, and the Confederates would be identified by the names of their commanders, like Hood's Brigade. But for some brigades, they would earn a nickname on the battlefield, like the Texas Brigade, Iron Brigade, and the Stonewall Brigade. Once a brigade is organized, it would be assigned to a division. A division is the 2nd largest unit in an army for either side. Each division would consist of 3 to 5 brigades with about 12,000 men, and would be led by a major general, and depending on the situation, a brigadier general. And these men, whoever it is, would answer directly to whoever is next rank up. A Confederate division would consist of more brigades with even more men. Like all other units, the strength of a division would vary throughout the war for both sides. By middle to late in the war, a division would only have about 50% of what it started with. In a Union army, it would be identified by their corps badges and flags with different colors of red, white, and blue for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd division respectively. If a Union Corps had more than 3 divisions, The 4th Division would wear green on its badges and flags, and the 5th Division would wear orange on its badges and flags. For Confederates, just like the brigades, they would recognize divisions by the names of their commanders as an AP Hills Light Division. Once the division had enough brigades, it'd be assigned to a corps. A corps is the largest unit in an army, and sometimes it'd be its own army. A corps would be composed of an average of 3 divisions and would be led by a major general for the Union and by lieutenant generals for the Confederates. The Union Army would designate its corps with Roman numerals up to XXV for the 43 corps that would be established before the war ended. But both Eastern and Western Union Corps took on the same Roman numerals. Union Corps would be identified with corps badges and the Roman numerals inside of the badge. Some of the corps badges would consist of triangles, crescents, arrows, and acorns, to name a few. For the Confederates, the Army of Northern Virginia would use wings until it was reorganized into corps after the Battle of Antietam. Their corps would be identified with numbers 1 to 4, but with some would take on their commander's name, like Jackson and Longstreet's corps. Going back to my example, at the Battle of Antietam, the order of battle for the 1st Texas Volunteer Infantry Regiment would be the 1st Texas Infantry Regiment, Hood's Brigade, Hood's Division, Longstreet's Corps, and Army of the Northern Virginia. An army is the highest level organization for both Union and Confederate militaries. An army would consist of an average of 3 corps and be led by major generals for the Union and full generals for the Confederates. A Union army would name itself after a river where it operated close to, like the Army of the Potomac or the Army of the Tennessee. The Confederates would name their armies after states or regions they operated in, as in the Army of Northern Virginia or the Army of Mississippi. However, Confederates were relaxed on their naming of armies because some armies were named the Army of the Potomac and the Army of the Mississippi. In total, the Union military had 16 armies and the Confederate military had 23 armies. After armies, even the commanders of the armies had a person to answer directly to. The only other commanders were the General of the Armies, which was only for the Union, Secretary of War, and the President, who was the commander-in-chief of either nation's military. Even though infantry did most of the fighting and dying, an army could not be efficient on the battlefield without the other 2 elements of cavalry and artillery. I will cover the structure of those 2 in later videos.